I knew something was off the minute I saw the phrase modular momentum growth pathways in Jenna's pitch deck. That was my phrase. Hell, I came up with it during a migraine and two stale vending machine Pop-Tarts at a Hampton Inn off I-70. No one else at Viron had ever uttered those words before, mostly because they sound like corporate gobbledygook until you see them in action. But there it was, front and center on slide 4 of her shiny new presentation. The exact framework I had walked the executive team through 2 weeks earlier in that glass-walled off-site meeting room with the sticky chairs and lukewarm coffee. Back then, the room had gone dead quiet. I had laid out a 10-slide plan for reigniting user acquisition through a modular growth cycle tied to behavior-based reactivation triggers, the kind of thing that doesn't sound sexy until it starts making people money. I'd built it over 6 months, tested it on sandbox models during weekends, refined it with enough caffeine and late nights to qualify for overtime if I wasn't salaried. And when I finally got a chance to pitch it, crickets. A few polite nods, some eye contact. Charlene, Jenna's director, even fake-scrolled her phone like she had an urgent Slack from Jesus Christ himself. So imagine my surprise when Jenna, Miss Can We Circle Back, unveiled a deck 2 weeks later that looked like it had been copied and pasted from my brain. Same pillars, same cycle names, same damn order. Except now, suddenly, everyone's acting like she'd cured business cancer. The CTO called it brilliant. The COO said it modernized our thinking. I just sat there in that meeting room, blinking slow, hands folded in my lap like a widow at a mafia funeral, trying to decide if I should throw up or start laughing. That moment, that was the sound of my last nerve snapping without a warning. And listen, if you've ever had someone professionally rob you in daylight with a smile on their face and glitter PowerPoint animations, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. 90% of you don't, and I get it. Maybe you're multitasking or yelling at a coworker right now, but it really helps the team keep telling stories like this one. Also, petty revenge runs on caffeine and approval. Now, I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream or flip the conference table, though God knows I fantasized about sending her coffee flying into her lap and blaming it on a marketing accident. I just stared at that screen as Jenna ran through my life cycle tears like she was reciting her grocery list. She even had the audacity to use the term strategic tempo zones, which I literally coined while muttering to myself in a Target parking lot. I remember because I had to stop walking and write it on a napkin. I waited until after the meeting, walked straight back to my desk, and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled out my personal laptop, yes, the forbidden fruit of BYOD hell, and logged into an old Google Drive, the one no one at Viron knew existed. The one where all my real work lived. You see, I learned a long time ago that being a woman in corporate strategy means keeping receipts like a paranoid tax auditor. Especially when the Jennas of the world get promoted for sounding confident while explaining your brilliance with a sugar smile and recycled jargon. I opened the folder labeled Crane IP Core Frameworks, and there it was, the exact strategic model, time-stamped, annotated, versions stretching back to 2021. Right there in black and white. I stared at it for a long time, letting the silence in my apartment fill with something new. Not sadness, not even anger, strategy. Cold, precise, unshakable. See, I had pitched that framework at the offsite to test it, sure, but also to see if the company would do the right thing and acknowledge its source. Instead, they let Jenna skate off with credit like I was just some background NPC in her success story. But they forgot one thing. I don't just build strategies, I own them. And now, I was done sharing. I didn't march into Charlene's office guns blazing. That's not how you survive 16 years in corporate America without becoming a bitter headline. No, I walked in calm, calculated, like I was asking for a stapler refill, not a goddamn retraction of a stolen strategic identity. Her office smelled like lavender lotion and moral superiority. That stupid little she believed she could, so she did plaque sat angled just so on her shelf, next to a framed picture of her dog in a Harvard hoodie. She looked up when I knocked. Her eyes, already glazing over like her brain, had put me in the nuisance category before I opened my mouth. I wanted to talk about the growth strategy Jenna presented last week, I said. It bore more than a passing resemblance to the framework I shared at the offsite. Charlene didn't blink. She sipped her chai like she was watching reruns of a show she barely liked. She murmured, setting the mug down with the grace of someone who drinks her own Kool-Aid. Yes, we did see some overlap. Overlap, I repeated, careful to keep my tone steady. Charlene, it was identical, down to the tier names. It was my strategy. She leaned back and gave me that smile. You know the one? The HR-certified, spiritually passive-aggressive grin that says, I'm about to gaslight you with such finesse you'll question the shape of water. It's company policy, she said lightly, like she was offering a biscuit. We all collaborate. Everyone's work feeds into everyone else's. It's how we stay nimble. Then came the line that would lodge itself in my skull like a splinter dipped in lemon juice. Learn to share, Emily. That was it. No apology. No curiosity. Not even a lazy attempt to pretend she'd look into it. Just a verbal pat on the head from a woman who probably had a Pinterest board titled Boss Babe Energy and thought stealing ideas was some kind of communal trust fall. I nodded, once. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just turned and walked out of her office with the kind of mechanical grace you only develop after years of swallowing your own voice in meetings where men mispronounce your name, but still quote your data. Back at my desk, I closed all tabs, shut down every active workspace, and ran a quiet script to delete all my local working files from the shared system. Not because I was being petty, because I was done feeding the machine. They wanted collaboration? Let them crowdsource mediocrity. Then I pulled out my personal laptop from the bottom drawer. Yes, the one I wasn't supposed to have in the office, the one with the cracked nevertheless, she persisted sticker half peeled off from old rage. I plugged it in, opened Chrome, and logged into my private Google Drive. There it was. Crane IP Core Frameworks, my real baby. The strategy documents no one had access to, versioned, labeled, and dated all the way back to the year Viron made me temporary project lead instead of promoting me. I scrolled past the folders labeled behavioral funnels, growth tiers, and retention webs, and clicked into the master doc. Metadata stared back at me like a silent witness in a courtroom drama. I hadn't just written the strategy. I had nurtured it, modeled it, tested it on side projects I ran under NDA for friends' startups. And thank God I had the foresight to keep those receipts. Because the look on Charlene's face had told me everything I needed to know. There was no internal justice. There would be no official review, no resolution, no accountability. This company didn't protect value, it consumed it. But what they didn't realize was that I had already separated the roots from the soil. I had a legal firewall in the shape of an LLC. And now, they were going to learn what happens when you tell a strategist to learn to share without checking who owns the blueprints. I closed my laptop. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. 2 years ago, I took a sabbatical that everyone at Viron thought was about self-care. That was the buzzword of the quarter, probably cooked up by the same exec who called unpaid overtime passion alignment. But the truth is, I didn't take 3 months off to go find myself on some yoga mat in Sedona. I took it because I was damn tired of building scaffolding for other people's promotions. I needed time to build something that couldn't be yanked from under me the second someone in a blazer smiled harder. So while they imagined me journaling in the woods or recharging with kombucha, I was sitting in a dusty corner of my apartment surrounded by whiteboards, diagrams, and empty coffee mugs, building out a complete, end-to-end growth ecosystem. Not just ideas, systems, tools, language. I codified every instinct I'd refined over 20 years and gave it structure. Something transferable, licensable, mine. That's when I formed Craneworks LLC. It cost $89 to incorporate. Another $150 for a virtual office address and EIN registration. I still remember clicking submit at 1:43 a.m., my screen dimmed so I wouldn't get another migraine. I poured myself a glass of boxed wine and toasted the dumb little confirmation email that made it official. I was done being a ghostwriter for other people's success stories. Then I paid extra, a lot extra, for time-stamped vault storage through an online IP legal service. It wasn't cheap, but I wasn't messing around. Every framework, every diagram, every strategic taxonomy had a verified upload date tied to my name, locked in encrypted vaults that could be subpoenaed if needed. Overkill? Probably. But if you've ever had a junior manager explain your own metrics to you like he invented math, you know what I mean. I didn't tell anyone at Viron. Why would I? I'd learned long ago that in most corporate environments, transparency is just a faster way to get robbed. And still, when I came back from sabbatical, I did try to play nice. I offered cross-pollination like they asked. I participated in those stupid brown bag lunch sessions where we all pretended to brainstorm, but really just repackaged old ideas with newer fonts. I even shared a neutered version of one framework to test the waters. The feedback? Lukewarm. One VP told me it felt a little dense and maybe I should infuse more marketing energy. Another asked if it could be simplified for someone not so deep in strategy, like the C-suite who makes the decisions. And Jenna? She was still in junior brand development back then, more concerned with hashtags than heuristics. So I filed it all away, returned to my usual quiet excellence. Let the deck gather dust until, 2 years later, it magically reappeared in Jenna's hands dressed in pastel gradients and buzzwords she probably Googled that morning. But here's the difference. When she copied that strategy, she wasn't just stealing slides. She was activating a legal minefield. Because the minute she clicked present, she put herself, and Viron, on the wrong side of a line I had drawn 2 years earlier in a dusty apartment with a broken air conditioner and nothing to lose. This wasn't going to be some HR tattletale moment. This was going to be surgical. Because while Jenna was learning how to pitch big ideas, I was quietly learning how to own them. And soon, everyone was going to find out what happens when you try to rebrand someone else's work, without checking if it's legally trademarked. The day after Charlene's smug little learn to share sermon, I showed up to work with a thumb drive in my purse and blood in my mouth. Not literal blood, but that coppery taste of betrayal you can't quite swallow. I didn't blast music on the drive in like I normally did. No morning podcast. No latte. Just silence and the slow click of my turn signal as I pulled into the same parking spot I'd parked in for 11 years, suddenly feeling like it belonged to someone else. I didn't say good morning to anyone. Just walked in, logged on, and got to work. Not their work. Mine. I opened Slack first. Not to send a message, but to search. Strategy session. Growth tiers. Emily Deck. Off-site recap. The threads were all there. Timestamps. Mentions. One thread even had Jenna reacting to my initial file upload with a thumbs up emoji and that infuriating little clapping love this. Reply. Love this? She loved it so much she copied it slide by slide and stripped the watermark off the master deck. Next up, email. I scoured my inbox and sent folders. My original draft, my notes to Charlene, my attached prep file for the offsite, even the confirmation email from the conference center with the projector spec requests. I'd wanted to test how my diagrams looked in 4:3 format because, unlike Jenna, I actually build my decks instead of slapping logos on stock graphics. Then I went into our internal cloud storage system. Viron thought it was secure, but someone had left access logs on default settings. I traced every version of my deck, who viewed it, who downloaded it, when. Jenna's name popped up a week after the offsite, right before the timestamp on her new vision pitch appeared. Classic rookie mistake, steal the playbook but forget the stadium has cameras. By noon I had enough to start the burn. I plugged in the thumb drive, copied everything, every receipt, every Slack thread, every draft, and zipped it up. Then I opened my personal Gmail, attached the file to a clean thread with my IP attorney, and typed 7 words, "We may need to file. Stand by." Her reply came back 10 minutes later. "Ready when you are, let me know." That's when I really started documenting. Not just for legal defense, but for narrative. Because I knew that this was going to come down to who could tell the better story under pressure. And let me tell you, I wasn't about to let Jenna shape this as some creative overlap misunderstanding. I started screen recording my own navigation through the folders, took videos of my screen showing version history, screenshot after screenshot of file names, timestamps, file hashes. I exported everything with SHA 256 checksums so they couldn't claim I tampered with dates later. I even pulled up an old text to my sister from back in 2021 where I joked about building a playbook they'll probably steal someday. It felt like prophecy. Oh, and I printed everything. Not just because I'm old school, but because one thing I've learned: when the power goes out or IT locks your badge, you still need evidence. Paper doesn't crash, paper doesn't log you out. By the end of the day, I had a 3-inch stack of physical proof and a 278 MB archive on an encrypted USB drive. I wasn't ready to launch yet, not quite, but the missiles were loaded. The targeting systems were online, and Jenna was out here giving interviews to the internal newsletter about her approach to agile brand optimization, like she hadn't just walked off with a briefcase of stolen fire. She had no idea how deep the roots of this thing went. But soon, she would. It was a Tuesday. Always is, for some reason: betrayals, audits, firings, they love a good Tuesday. The sky was that dead fluorescent gray, the kind that makes everything outside the window look like a screensaver. I got in early, earlier than usual. Not to work on some new initiative or save the latest dumpster fire, but to wait. My attorney had submitted the IP violation notice at 8:02 a.m. Eastern. That's when the fuse lit. The message went directly to Viron's legal team and the board's designated compliance counsel. Subject line was simple, surgical: IP rights enforcement strategic framework violation. Attached were 3 documents: the proof of ownership ledger from the vault, a comparative analysis showing my framework vs Jenna's, and a formal notice outlining the breach and exposure risk. Then came the real kicker: a line buried in the second paragraph that read, pending resolution, Craneworks LLC reserves the right to seek damages, including any loss of licensing opportunity or public misattribution impacting the market perception of proprietary work. Translation: if they didn't act fast, this wasn't just a workplace squabble. It was a legal liability with $signs attached. And make no mistake, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because people like Jenna bank on silence. They count on the fact that most of us, especially women over 40 with just enough PTO to make quitting tempting, won't make noise, won't call lawyers, won't walk into the battlefield wearing a sensible blouse and wielding a legally binding payload. I didn't storm in yelling, didn't leak anything to the grapevine. I went about my day like nothing had happened, answered emails, reviewed a product launch brief, ate my sad little turkey sandwich in the break room while someone microwaved fish behind me like an act of war. Meanwhile, behind the glass, the first signs of panic started to ripple. Around noon, I saw Viron's head of legal, Marcus, walking unusually fast across the atrium. He usually moved like a man who'd never felt wind resistance before. Now he was speed walking with his tie slightly askew, holding a red folder that matched the exact shade of institutional dread. 15 minutes later, an emergency compliance meeting appeared on the board's shared calendar. Private. Invite only. I wasn't on the list. Didn't need to be. I'd already said everything I had to say, in ink and law. By 2 p.m., someone from IT requested access logs for internal file downloads dated 3 weeks prior. I knew the dates by heart. Jenna had accessed my original framework doc 2 days before her big reveal, and I'd flagged the exact timestamp like a sniper lining up a shot. Charlene and Jenna were still floating above it, all like flies on whipped cream, blissfully unaware. Jenna even stopped by my desk around 3 to ask if I could eyeball the funnel segmentation she was playing with. I looked her straight in the face, smiled just enough to hide the poison in my molars, and said, "You'll get plenty of eyes on it soon, I'm sure." And then I waited. Every hour that passed rang louder than the last. No one said anything to me. No calls, no pings, but I could feel it like a storm moving underground. Systems being accessed, calendars being updated, legal templates being drafted with words like exposure, compliance risk, material misstatement. I stayed late, not because I had to, just to make sure they knew I wasn't afraid of the dark. At 6:48 p.m., my phone buzzed, not a call, a calendar update. Subject, IP risk timeline request strategy review. It was addressed to the full executive board. And at the very bottom, the new invitee listed by legal, Emily Crane. Strategic asset IP claimant. They didn't know it yet, but I'd already won. Now it was just a matter of how loud they wanted this explosion to be. By Wednesday morning, the cracks weren't just forming, they were hissing. You could feel it in the way people spoke in hushed tones near the espresso machine, or how certain Slack channels suddenly went quiet, like the digital equivalent of rats scurrying under floorboards. At 9:03 a.m., Marcus from Legal sent out a firm-wide statement about proactive auditing and process clarity, the kind of corporate word salad you serve when your house is halfway on fire, but you still want investors to think the curtains are just warm. The subject line was Operational Transparency Initiative, which made me snort into my coffee. Bold of them to pretend this was routine. I'd seen fish tanks cleaned with more subtlety, but the real damage started in the back end. I got a tip unofficially from someone in IT I used to mentor. Let's call him Kyle, though his real name isn't important. What mattered was that Kyle had access to the access logs, and Kyle had a conscience. Just so you know, he messaged me from a personal number. We pulled the download logs. Jenna accessed your original doc at 2:14 a.m. 3 days before her pitch. Downloaded it twice. Metadata's still intact. I stared at the message for a long second, not because I was surprised, hell, I expected it, but because of what it meant. They'd found it themselves. I didn't have to shove it in anyone's face. The system was doing it for me. That's when it snowballed. Compliance got wind, some say Marcus leaked it himself, that misattributed IP being used in investor-facing materials could compromise our entire liability insurance package. Specifically, our IP misrepresentation clause, buried deep in the policy fine print. If Jenna's deck was passed off as internally developed and the origin was in dispute, that triggered an automatic material risk event. Translation, we could lose coverage. And for a company like Viron, with a pending Series D round and multiple international licensing deals on the table, that wasn't a slap on the wrist. That was a fiscal heart attack. By 11:30 a.m., a source audit was in full swing. Legal requested access to every version of Jenna's deck, drafts, revisions, Google Drive histories. I heard through the grapevine that Charlene's assistant had to pull backup copies from her own email because Jenna couldn't produce originals. That's when people really started sweating. And then, God bless her ignorance, Jenna made the mistake that sealed it all. In a desperate attempt to cover her tracks, she forwarded a modified version of the pitch deck to legal, claiming it had been created from scratch. She tried to strip the metadata, rename the files, even change the visual template slightly to make it distinct. But she didn't know how version control works in shared systems, or that PDFs preserve hidden metadata like digital DNA. IT flagged it within the hour. The creation date was after my off-site presentation. But more damning, the underlying file history linked back to my original doc. She'd exported it, edited it, renamed it, and pretended it was born whole from her marketing womb. Sloppy, desperate, exactly what I needed. Marcus called an emergency meeting with internal counsel, compliance, and the COO by 2 p.m. Words started leaking in whispers, even to the front desk admin who once told me I looked tired in a spiritual way. She wasn't wrong. By the time I walked past Jenna's office at 4 o'clock, her door was closed and her face was ghost white behind the glass. She was on a call, pacing, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her free hand tangled in her own hair. Satisfaction bloomed in my chest, but it wasn't pure. It was mixed with dread, because now it was real. Now the cleanup would begin. And I knew what that looked like. Meetings, NDA, legal negotiations, quiet threats dressed up as options. I wasn't some corporate Bond villain. I didn't want to blow it all up. But when someone sets fire to your work and calls it theirs, you either douse the flames or walk away covered in ash. And I'd never been the walk away type. The first sign was the absence of noise. No Slack pings, no passive-aggressive calendar invites, just silence, the kind that creeps into the cracks of a collapsing structure. By Thursday, the tension inside Viron's glass walls was so thick you could spoon it into a mug and sip it like regret. At 8:17 a.m., the executive board convened in what they called an off-cycle alignment huddle, which is rich because nothing about what was happening felt aligned. The meeting wasn't on the public calendar. But thanks to a certain friendly soul in facilities, who owed me after I fixed the strategic comms plan he botched for Q2, I knew where they were gathering. Conference room 4A, one they use when they're pretending to be collaborative while scrambling to triage a fire someone swore couldn't start. Legal came in first. Marcus, shoulders tighter than a banker's handshake, holding two thick folders and a tablet like he was about to perform last rites. Then compliance. Then the CFO, who looked like she hadn't slept since Jenna uploaded her Frankenstein pitch deck. Finally, the board members filtered in, faces blank, brows tight. Not a damn one of them made eye contact with me as I passed by. I didn't need to be in the room. My presence was already baked into the panic. Because what started as a quiet IP claim had now mutated into a full-on credibility crisis. Jenna's vision had been scheduled as a centerpiece of our next quarter investor pitch, a pitch tied directly to a product rollout with millions in projected capital inflow. And now, that pitch was radioactive. Inside that glass room, someone finally asked the question I'd been waiting on for days. Do we have a license agreement from her? It was one of the outside board members, straight shooter. The kind who asks things that HR wishes would die quietly in committee. Marcus didn't flinch, just tapped his screen and said no, she owns it, no denial, no corporate euphemism. Just 6 syllables that changed the power dynamic in the building forever. She owns it. That's when everything shifted. Because up until that point I was a problem, an employee, an internal irritant, but now I was a legal entity, a claimant, a risk with teeth. By 11:04 a.m., an internal memo went out from legal to the compliance chain and the board liaison team. Subject line, action required Crane IP risk. Not issue, not concern. Risk. They were no longer brushing me off, they were bracing for what I could do. I sat at my desk, watching it unfold in real time. I didn't gloat, didn't preen. But I did take a moment to breathe, deep and slow, in a way I hadn't since Jenna hijacked my future and presented it with bullet points and smugness. At 1:00 p.m., a meeting request hit my inbox. Investor Strategy Continuity Review Invitation to Contribute. The kind of vague title you slap on a conversation that involves lawyers, insurance adjusters, and one very quiet woman with a very loud file cabinet of proof. I accepted. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the hard copy binder I'd prepped days earlier, labeled Crane Works, licensing options and royalty terms, and slid it into my bag. No one had talked numbers yet, but they would. And the next time my name came up in a boardroom, it wouldn't be as someone to manage. It'd be someone they couldn't afford not to pay. By Friday morning, the building smelled like fear and lemon-scented Lysol. You could always tell when HR was about to clean house. The air got too clean too fast, like they were trying to scrub guilt out of the vents. Jenna's reassignment email hit at 8:46 a.m. No warning. Just a short, vague note from HR thanking her for her contributions to cross-functional integration and announcing she'd be transitioning into a new opportunity outside Viron. That's code for we gave her a box and a 30-day NDA window to shut the hell up. She didn't even come in to pack her things. Someone from facilities did it for her. Her desk was cleared before most people finished their coffee, and her personalized "let's get this bread" mug ended up in the kitchen's freebie shelf like a sad, caffeinated tombstone. Charlene, for her part, pulled the classic high ground exit. A planned retirement announcement the very next day, full of recycled cliches about new chapters and time with family, which would have been more believable if she hadn't spent the last 10 years treating family time like a weakness and interns like chew toys. The same people who had once laughed off my complaint were now sprinting to distance themselves from it. And me? I wasn't celebrating. Not yet, because now they needed something. The investor deck. With Jenna gone and the original strategy disqualified as tainted IP, the company had no cohesive plan to present at next quarter's summit. The core growth framework, the one that drove the entire pitch, was mine. And unless they wanted to pitch a blank slide and call it innovation, they needed me to step in. They asked me nicely. Even used words like respect your leadership, strategic clarity, and we value your unique contribution. The desperation was dressed up in compliments, but I could smell the sour note beneath it. I didn't give them an answer right away. Instead, I sent a 2-sentence reply, happy to contribute. Please route all collaboration requests through my counsel at Craneworks LLC. Licensing terms to follow. It got quiet after that, for a few hours. Then came the flurry of emails, legal, compliance, investor relations. The coup, they were ready to talk terms. The power dynamic had flipped so hard it made the air pressure shift. Suddenly, I wasn't Emily from strategy. I was the owner of the deck they needed to stand on in front of their biggest investors. And I was done working for free. By Monday, a licensing contract was in draft. not just for use of the IP, but retroactive royalties for its deployment in prior presentations and investor briefs. I even had a clause inserted that tied continued use to advisory access, just in case they got clever and tried to internalize it again through another Jenna 2.0. I didn't push back, not once. When the final draft came through, I read every line 3 times, printed it, signed it, and scanned it back with a sticky note attached. Thanks for finally learning how to share. The deck was mine, the language was mine, the royalties were real. I joined the investor prep sessions as external advisor and licensing consultant. They gave me a badge that didn't say employee, it said partner. And still, I didn't smile, because I knew this wasn't a victory. It was leverage. And leverage, used right, doesn't win wars, it rewrites them. The ballroom was freezing. One of those carpeted corporate mausoleums where daylight dies and strategic buzzwords go to multiply. Round tables littered with untouched croissants, half-sipped coffee, and glossy brochures that tried too hard to make data look sexy. The kind of place where suits rehearse sincerity and capital flows like champagne, if you're holding the right pen. I sat stage left, off to the side. No name card, no title placard, just a black folder in my lap and a calmness I didn't quite recognize. The investor summit had been circled in red on the company calendar for months, Viron's official debut as a post-Series C powerhouse. But this time, there was no Jenna prancing across the stage in block heels and buzzwords. No Charlene in the wings pretending she couldn't hear when people whispered whose idea was that really? No, this time it was mine. All of it. The strategy they were about to sell to institutional investors, my model, my language, my life cycle tiers, my digital fingerprints in every bullet point they dared to speak. I watched as the board chair took the stage. A man who once told me my style was too analytical for leadership. He smiled now like I'd just saved his family from a burning building. The room hushed. Before we begin today's roadmap presentation, he said, adjusting his mic, we'd like to publicly acknowledge someone whose original strategic vision has shaped our growth trajectory and whose frameworks underpin the very innovation we're bringing to market. He turned, scanning the tables, then motioned. Emily Crane, please stand. There it was. I rose, slowly. No sweeping hand wave, no pageant smile, just a single nod. One sharp movement that said, you see me now because you have to. The applause started hesitant, then grew. Hands clapping like they were trying to drown out the sound of everything they'd ignored until now. My old colleagues stood. A few even smiled, wide and shaky, unsure if they were witnessing a triumph or a warning shot. The chair continued. Effective immediately, we're naming Emily as Executive Director of Innovation. Her advisory role has become essential. And now, we look forward to her leadership in our continued evolution. Another round of clapping. I sat back down before it finished. My phone buzzed, I glanced down. A text from my attorney, licensing payment received, full transfer confirmed. I didn't smile, not because I wasn't proud, but because pride had long since been replaced with precision. I hadn't wanted applause. I hadn't wanted revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. And now, they'd carved it into the agenda. A man on stage moved to the first slide of my framework, the one Jenna had once dared to claim as her own. Now it sat beneath a title that said, Crane Works Growth Model Licensed and Powered by Viron. I folded my hands. They told me to learn to share. I taught them to license. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.